Ukraine's counterattack. London-based Daily Mail reporter Chris Pleasance has a report titled, Exclusive, The Ukraine Counteroffensive, How, Where and When Zelensky's forces Will Hit the Russians in Long-Awaited Spring Assault, according to military generals, meaning, exclusive report, Ukraine's counterstrike. According to Army generals, Zelensky's forces will attack the Russians, where and when in the spring offensive awaited from long. For months, Ukraine's generals have been digging into maps, studying intelligence, and shuffling the pieces as they try to come up with a plan to take back their country. Meanwhile, Kyiv's allies rummaged through their lockers for any spare kits that might be useful. The moment of truth has now come. Russia's winter offensive is about to run out of steam. Ukraine's muddy ground is starting to harden. What is the plan? Ukraine is said to be rallying up to 100,000 men into at least 12, but perhaps up to 18 combat brigades to confront the Russians. They are said to have been supplied with around 200 Western tanks, 800 armored vehicles and 150 cannons to equip 9 of those brigades, meaning they could arm a total of 400 tanks, 1,600 vehicles and 300 guns if they plan to build 9 more brigades. Russia's status is less clear. Based on leaked casualty figures, Putin may have as few as 100,000 or as many as 290,000 in Ukraine. Similar leaks suggest that he only has about 500 tanks left on the battlefield, but more can be obtained from the inventory. The number of armored vehicles and heavy artillery is not clear. Ukraine's battle plans are a closely guarded secret, but Mick Ryan, a recently retired general from the Australian Army, told Mail Online that Kyiv has 3 big options. First, they can launch a single massive attack, using everything they have. Second, they could subdivide their forces to launch simultaneous attacks on the south and east. Or third, they may decide to attack on a smaller scale both south and east, without coordination. General Stephen Twitty, retired from the U.S. military, believes Ukraine will go for option 3, a tactic he calls eating apples one by one. Ukraine will continue with what has worked for them in the past, he said. What the Ukrainians have done successfully are small-scale maneuvers using infantry, armor and artillery, to attack Russian forces in small areas and gain ground. General Ryan believes it will be a combination of options 2 and 3. A large-scale attack, he predicts, is unlikely because it is difficult to organize and easy for the Russians to detect and defend, but he believes Ukraine's plan will be unlike anything we've seen before. Seen so far. This is going to look very different because the challenge is different, he said. They'll have to level out areas of obstacles they've never done before. One thing the Ukrainians have mastered in this war is to surprise us. Where would Ukraine strike? The Russians believe that Melitopol, a small city in southern Ukraine captured in the first days of the war, is the most likely target. Taking it back would break the land bridge between Putin's forces to the south and east, opening the way to recapturing Mariupol and bringing Crimea within HIMARS range. And in recent weeks, Ukraine has stepped up its bombardment of military targets in the city with long-range rockets and artillery, seemingly to confirm those suspicions. Attacks on the eastern Luhansk region are also likely, as Ukraine seeks to ease pressure on places like Bakhmut and take back industrial centers in the Donbass. General Ryan said that surprise will be the key to victory, because Russia does not have enough troops to defend the entire 750-mile or 1,200-kilometer front. And the men Russia has are very different in character, from elite paratroopers to conscripts with only 1 day of training. That means the front line will have weaknesses, and the path to Ukraine's victory lies in finding and exploiting them. If they could trick the Russians into placing their best units around a city they didn't really plan to attack, that would help. We are talking about 1,200 kilometers of defense. No army can defend 1,200 kilometers of defense. The key will be to find the weak points in it. 2. Reports show that Russian soldiers and Wagner mercenaries started fighting with each other. Newsweek had an article titled Russian Soldiers and Wagner Mercenaries Start Fighting Each Other, report, which means report shows that Russian soldiers and Wagner mercenaries begin to fight each other. A reported gun battle broke out between Russian soldiers and mercenaries of the Wagner Corporation, which is responsible for Russia's failures in its invasion of Ukraine, military officials from Kyiv said. On Sunday, Russian President Vladimir Putin launched his special military operation to invade Ukraine last February. The Kremlin aimed for a quick victory over the Eastern European nation, which at the time was believed to have a smaller and weaker army than Russia. However, after more than a year of fighting, Moscow has struggled to achieve important goals in the war-torn country by Western military aid to Ukraine. Fighting remains concentrated in the easternmost regions of the country, which is expected to launch a counteroffensive soon to regain more of the invaded territory. Amid growing battlefield losses, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said in an update on Sunday that tensions between Russian forces and mercenaries fighting for the Wagner Group, the paramilitary organization that has been fighting alongside Putin's army in Ukraine, has recently come to a bitter dispute over why Russia had to rush into the war. With no significant achievements on the battlefield, the Russian armed forces and the Wagner Corporation are increasingly trying to find someone to blame for these failures. They blamed each other for tactical miscalculations and the losses they suffered. As a result, a skirmish between the Russian armed forces and Wagner mercenaries broke out in the Stanitsia-Luhanska settlement of the Luhansk province recently. The exchange of words then escalated into a gunfight, killing an unidentified number of soldiers on both sides. Other details about the skirmish, including when exactly it happened and how many soldiers were killed, have yet to be detailed. Meanwhile, Russia does not endorse Ukraine's claims, which cannot be independently verified. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Defense Ministry for comment via email. Military analysts have pointed to a number of reasons why Russia could not quickly win the war in Ukraine. For instance, experts say these troops have suffered from low morale and motivation amid growing losses. Arms supplied to Ukraine by Western allies, including the United States, are believed to have bolstered the country's anticipated stronger defense efforts against Russia. Experts say these weapons allowed Ukraine to launch a counteroffensive last fall, which led to Kyiv regaining thousands of square miles of previously invaded territory. The Wagner Group fought alongside the Russian army, especially in the city of Bakhmut, where Russia sought to gain control to deliver a symbolic victory after months of stagnation. The organization is mainly composed of convicts, some of whom were pardoned after fighting for 6 months in Ukraine. Bakhmut was the site of some of the bloodiest battles of the war. Russia and Ukraine have been jostling over parts of the city for months. On Sunday, Russia said it had captured more territory from Ukraine, but by the end of the day the Russians had been driven back. Meanwhile, The Guardian newspaper reported on Saturday that a number of Wagner Group service members have returned to Russia and have been linked to the killings inside Russia. 3. U.S. Admiral mocks Russia for allowing its navy to shrink. Newsweek ran an article titled "Russia has allowed its navy to atrophy, retired U.S. admiral," which means the American admiral mocks that Russia has allowed its navy to shrink. According to a former U.S. Navy admiral, the Russian military has allowed its surface naval fleet to shrink. Retired U.S. Navy admiral and dean of the Center for Maritime Strategy, James G. Fago, told Newsweek that Russia's surface fleet has been neglected, despite Russia's submarine capabilities far out their surface fleet. Russia's growing naval capabilities have alarmed NATO allies as Russian President Vladimir Putin has doubled down on the expansion of his advanced submarine fleet. However, surface fleets have experienced a number of notable incidents, including the sinking of the flagship Moskva, of the Black Sea Fleet, in April 2022. As of 2023, Russia has a total of 598 military ships, including 15 destroyers and 11 frigates, according to Statista data published on March 30. Moscow's force has only one model aviation. The flagship is the Admiral Kuznetsov. The Admiral Kuznetsov aircraft carrier had many problems. It caught fire in December after major repairs. One person was killed and more than a dozen injured when the ship caught fire in December 2019. The aircraft carrier was also damaged in October 2018 after a dry dock collapsed at the Murmansk facility where it was located. The ship is being refitted. In early January, Ukraine's military intelligence service said the aircraft carrier is not capable of moving on its own. Ukraine said the hull was in critical condition, adding that significant corrosion had damaged metal structures on the lower deck of the ship. Ukraine added, the bunkers were filled with muddy water, making detailed examination of the ship from the inside impossible. Pointing to the series of unfortunate failures surrounding the aircraft carrier, Admiral Fago said that the ship did not contribute much to the surface fleet of the Russian Navy. However, the Russian Navy remains important to Russia's political leadership. In 2009, then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev said that, without the proper navy, Russia has no future as a country. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Defense Ministry by email for comment. The largest surface ships of the Russian Navy are old Soviet ships that are becoming less reliable over time, the George C. Marshall Center for European Security Studies said in 2019. On April 14, Russia announced a series of military exercises involving the Pacific Fleet, which the Kremlin said involved more than 25,000 troops and 167 warships, as well as 12 submarines. The Kremlin Palace said these were unplanned exercises. Although Russia's military priority remains the ongoing war in Ukraine, no one should neglect or cancel the fleet development tasks, including in the Pacific, Putin told the minister. Defense Sergei Shoigu, according to the content of the meeting released by the Kremlin on Monday. The forces of the fleet in individual components must be sure to be able to be used in conflicts in any direction, the Russian leader said. On Thursday, Russian media reported that the head of the Pacific Fleet, Admiral Sergei Avakiants, had to step down from command of the fleet he had led for more than a decade. Fourth, Ukrainian troops are reported to have established positions east of the Dnipro near the city of Kherson. The Institute for the Study of War reported, citing Russian military bloggers, that Ukrainian troops had established positions east of the Dnipro River near the city of Kherson. Infiltrating the area could be the first step towards trying to dislodge the Russians from the positions they are using to shell and fire on Kherson. Repeated attacks have prevented residents from returning to normal, months after the Ukrainian army liberated the city from Russian aggression. Ukraine's military strikes across the river could also mark the first steps towards launching a long-awaited spring offensive. The think tank said in an update on the war. This is the first time that ISW has observed reliable geofencing images of Ukraine's positions on the east coast along with Russian multi-source reports of Ukraine's long-term presence there. Russian military bloggers say Ukrainian forces have established stable supply lines to their positions and regularly conduct sorties in the area, the ISW said. The report said the reported locations were near the settlements of Oshki and Dachi. Russia still holds the settlements. A spokesman for the Ukrainian military for the southern region declined to comment on reports regarding Ukrainian military activities on the left bank of the Dnipro River. Natalia Humanyuk told TV Channel 24. There is an ongoing military operation that requires information silence. And when it is allowed, we will definitely notify you. Ukrainian government officials and commanders have been signaling for months that when the weather and troops are ready, they will try to drive Russian forces out of the south. An autumn campaign liberated much of northeastern Kharkiv and drove the Russian army out of Kherson, at which point their last stronghold was on the western bank of the Dnipro. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg on Friday said he was confident Ukraine was ready to retake more of its territory in the next offensive. 5. State Department official says Ukraine needs more military support to defeat Russia this year. Ukraine's Deputy Foreign Minister Andriy Melnik said Ukraine needed significantly more military support than its allies have provided so far to put an end to Russia's aggression this year. We are very grateful to our allies for their military help. But it is not enough. Ukraine needs 10 times more to end Russia's aggression this year, Melnik said. He called on Ukraine's partners to cross all artificial red lines and spend 1% of GDP on supplying Ukraine with weapons. Our allies must understand the scale of this war, the deputy minister said in a conversation with Ukrainian media on Friday. Melnik quoted U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin as saying that an international coalition has so far provided Ukraine with $55 billion in assistance. That seems like a big number. But during the Second World War, which, unfortunately, this invasion had more and more parallels that could be drawn, more than $50 billion worth of help was provided by contract alone. Loans to the United States in the 1940s. Today's equivalent would be around $700 to $800 billion. What Ukraine has received from its allies, modern battle tanks are one of the important contributions provided by Western allies to Ukraine. Ukrainian forces will begin training on how to operate Abrams tanks next month. According to Austin, the coalition's $55 billion in security assistance to Ukraine includes more than 230 tanks and more than 1,550 armored vehicles and other equipment and ammunition. 6. Assistant to the President of Ukraine, Mikhailo Podolyak, criticized the Chinese ambassador to France. Ukraine's presidential aide, Mikhailo Podolyak, criticized the Chinese ambassador's comments to France. Podolyak said the status of post-Soviet states is respected by international law, and he also objected to the comments of Liu She, China's ambassador to France, about Crimea, which was invaded by Russia in 2014. In an interview with the French network TF1, Liu She said that Crimea belongs to Russia from the very beginning. He also emphasized that, in international law, even the countries of the former Soviet Union do not have the valid status in international law, because there is no international agreement to concretize their status as a sovereign state. Liu She's comment is very flawed, because according to his opinion, Russia itself, also a country from the former Soviet bloc, does not have the status of a sovereign country. Yet today, Russia has taken a seat on the United Nations Security Council. Mikhailo Podolyak countered that, all post-Soviet states have clear sovereignty enshrined in international law. He also said that, it is strange to hear a ridiculous version of Crimea's history from a representative of a country that is very careful about its millennial history. If you want to be a big political player, don't repeat Russian propaganda. There were more reactions to the Chinese ambassador's comments to France questioning the sovereignty of post-Soviet countries. The European Union's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, said Liu She's words were unacceptable, and he hoped they did not reflect Beijing's official stance. The comment of the Chinese ambassador to France is unacceptable, Mr. Borrell said. The European Union hopes that these statements do not represent official Chinese policy. Mr. Borrell is the latest to express outrage in Europe over remarks made by the Chinese ambassador on French television on Friday.